G'day, my name's Ruben Ingall and welcome to my presentation about no input mixing for the Australasian Computer Music Conference 2020. Even though the conference is online this year, it's hosted in Canberra and that's where I am. I want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri owners of this land and pay my respects to their elders and to acknowledge other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending the conference. I'm going to dive right in. Audio feedback is a type of positive loop gain which occurs when a sound loop exists between an audio input and an audio output. A common way to do this is to hold a microphone up to a speaker, and the resulting sound is determined by the resonant frequencies of each stage: the microphone, the amplifier, the loudspeaker, the acoustics of the room, so on. Guitar amplifier feedback has become part of the language of rock music, used in a lot of noise and art music. In the mid-90s, Japanese musician Toshimaru Nakamura and others pioneered an instrument called a no-input mixing board, or NIMB, or NIMB, which is created by plugging an audio mixer's outputs back into its inputs. In this setup, the resulting sound is determined by the resonant frequencies emergent from the mixer's circuitry. So it can be altered with the mixer's controls, and they often start to take on different or unusual behaviors. From Nakamura's website, the unpredictability of the instrument requires an attitude of obedience and resignation to the system and the sounds it produces, bringing a high level of indeterminacy and surprise to the music. And I totally agree. Here's what my mixer looks like. The volume knob, for example, turned up from nothing, will seem to do nothing until it reaches a threshold where it's amplifying the line noise, the self noise of the mixer enough to create a feedback tone. Then, as you increase the volume on that knob, it actually alters the frequency of the tone, descending in this case. And you see the level meter is straight into the red zone. The tones often have a kind of distorted sine wave, or like a triangle, square sound to them. I think because the limits of the hardware essentially function as a kind of dirty limiter. My first instinct from this point was to try layering, sound on sound, more elements, more tones, but it's not quite that simple. Adding another loop won't necessarily add another tone because they may just sum together. Say you added another cable like so, you'd still only get one tone, only now its frequency and character are being controlled by two sets of channel controls. I've gotten around this by panning some channels hard left and right so that they don't sum with one another. And this way I can play two tones against each other. I also added an overdrive pedal and a loop pedal, and settled on a particular patching arrangement and then tried to just learn that version as an instrument and acquire some proficiency, which I'm happy to report I think is possible. When I add some energy, some level from the overdrive pedal feedback loop, it has an interesting effect of making the other tones lock to certain intervals rather than move continuously as you heard before. I think this is due to the circuitry of this particular pedal. I also tried a jackhammer distortion, which behaved differently. And by recording into a loop pedal and then feeding that back in, it sums with the feedback tones in an interesting way. You don't really hear discrete layers of sound. You hear this interaction, and any adjustments to any of the channels affects the other things that it's combining with. One of my favorite things about this is how you can always hear the rhythm of that loop, but the timbre and pitch are kind of up for manipulation using the other feedback loop channels. I've also been playing around with visualizations for this. I had some past experience with phase scopes, and I knew that when two channels were out of phase, you could get interesting patterns. But it turns out that when you have completely different signals in each channel, the patterns can be even more fun. There's plenty of DAW phase scope plugins used for mastering that are geared towards technical analysis, but I found one that is geared towards looking nice and being customizable, called Prettyscope. This pattern is called a Lissajous figure or Lissajous curve. It's technically a graph of a system of parametric equations which describe complex harmonic motion, according to Wikipedia. I'm not a mathematician, but my understanding is that the ratio between the frequencies of the signals on the left and right channels affects the complexity of the resulting curve. There's one Lissajous curve you're probably very familiar with, which has a ratio of 3:1. And I tried to replicate that with my NIMB and kind of almost got there. But I've also made a bunch of other interesting patterns. And this opens up another way to play the NIMB, which is not so much about the sound, but about chasing and investigating the shapes produced. So, should you try this at home? Maybe. But I do have two warnings. The first is put another mixer or some kind of volume control in between your NIMB and your speakers, and start with that volume control turned all the way down, because the output from the NIMB can be very loud, so please don't deafen yourself or blow up your speakers. The second thing is there's a risk that your mixer might not react very well to this. It might not like it, it might not turn on ever again. This might happen without much fuss, or it might be much more dramatic. Certainly my gigging rig can resemble an electrical fire hazard at times, so I'd say use a mixer that you can afford to throw away, something already partially broken or something second-hand. I guess I can recommend the Behringer Eurorack MX602A that I've been using. It's put up with over a year of about weekly usage for NIMB purposes, but your mileage may vary. Thanks for watching. I'll now just give you a bit more of a live demonstration, including the addition of a kick drum on a cassette to bring a bit of noisy raviness